Alright everyone, so who are you actually listening to? It's always nice to know a little bit about the person who does the teaching, especially because there's such a distance between us, this being a web-based lecture. So my name is Mazio Tamasebi. I'm a lecturer part-time lecturer at Fontes University of Applied Sciences. At the undergrad level, at the grad level, I also teach at Plymouth University in cooperation with the ELAC. I also do consultancy and have done so before I started teaching. I supervised projects, among others, for these companies, and I really enjoyed both of these things that I do. Especially the teaching is something that I find really cool to do, which was also the reason why I started doing this. So to basically take what I do offline to the online world. My hobbies, well, I really enjoy video games, but only let's say the old school games from the 90s, the NES, the Super NES, that era. I really enjoy that. I'm not really into the more new stuff. I also really like movies, everything ranging from Star Trek to The Last Emperor and pretty much everything in between that. So I have a really broad taste. And since recently, I also enjoy working out. I'm not that good at it. I'm not still in a great shape, but I do my best. And that's it, a little bit about me. So I design all of this myself. I really hope you enjoy it, and thank you so much for your support, and hope you have a great time. Thanks. Hi there everyone, topic for today is going to be the difference between cryptocurrencies and so-called fiat currencies. Well, fiat currencies are currencies such as the dollar, euro, Japanese yen, national currencies. These we call fiat currencies. By the way, it has nothing to do with the car brand. And fiat currency simply means that the value of these currencies is determined by a government fiat, which is basically a government order. Why does this one has the value of $1? Well, it's simply because the US government says it has the value of $1. If instead they would draw here, instead of a 1, a 5 or a 10, it would have a value of 5 or 10. So it's determined by government fiat, and that is why we call it fiat currency. Cryptocurrencies include a wide list. There are hundreds of cryptocurrencies out there, but I would say the more famous ones are these ones. They are not issued by any government, and their value is not determined by a government order or a government fiat. Hence, they're not called fiat currencies. Now, since there are hundreds of cryptocurrencies out there, we cannot focus on the difference of each one of them relative to fiat currencies. We're going to focus on the Bitcoin, but the good news is that most cryptocurrencies are quite similar to Bitcoin, so still you're going to get a lot of value out of this lecture. The first difference we're going to focus on is the following, and that has to do with central command. Fiat currencies have a central command that controls the supply and hence the value of the currencies. For instance, the Bank of England oversees the supply and the value of the British pound. We have the ECB, the European Central Bank, that does the same for the euro, and the Bank of Japan, well, surprise, surprise, it does the same for the Japanese yen. Bitcoin is different. It does not have a central command. It is based on something that we call the blockchain technology, which does not have a central point of command. Now, at this point, it's maybe a little bit mysterious, so let's look at an example. You have to imagine this blockchain as a decentralized something. A series of blocks. Now these blocks, for instance, this is block 1, this is block 2, block 3. There are many out there, not just these 5. Each one of these blocks contains information about all users and how much they have. Okay, so in this block you have all the information about all the users of Bitcoin and how much they have, and the same exact information is also contained in this block and this block, etc., etc. None of these blocks controls the rest or dominates. This one has as much access to information as this one, because of the fact that the blockchain is decentralized, it also means that it's quite robust. You cannot attack the central points and manipulate the blockchain because there is no center point. The second difference between fiat currency and cryptocurrency is the supply. Fiat currency has a potentially endless supply. Most cryptocurrency, Bitcoin for instance, is not like that. It has a fixed supply. There are 21 million Bitcoins out there. Not all of them have been accessed right now, but 21 million is the maximum amount of supply of Bitcoins. This is not the case for fiat currency. Fiat currency, you can print as much of it as you want. Well, not you, the government, but still. It was not always like that. Fiat currency used to be backed by gold and silver. But this ended a long time ago, decades ago. The last currency that had a partial backing by gold was the Swiss franc, and this also ended a few years ago. Which means that these little beautiful things, this is an old Hungarian gold coin from 1491, a beautiful, absolutely beautiful specimen. Since governments do no longer back their fiat currencies with gold, they can print as much as they want. When governments print extra fiat currency to stimulate the economy, we refer to that as quantitative easing or quantitative loosening. All fancy words that actually boil down to the following: your money loses value because more of it is in circulation. So whatever you had, whatever fiat currency you had, has now less value than before, and you had no say about it. Your money is subject to inflation. It loses its value because of what the government did. So the probable long-term development of fiat currency is inflation. Its value is going to go down because the governments will print more and more of it to stimulate the economy or for whatever other reason. With the Bitcoin, this is different. The long-term development of Bitcoin is deflation. It's going to increase its value. All other things remaining the same, or as we say in economics, ceteris paribus. Why? Because it has a fixed supply. You cannot just endlessly print more and more Bitcoins. So at one point it ends, it circulates, and its value per unit is going to increase. And again, this is based on the ceteris paribus clause, namely all other factors remaining constant. We see examples of government printing excessive amounts of fiat currency all the time, and it creates inflation. Usually governments are quite careful, and they're careful not to create too much inflation, but every once in a while a government is so irresponsible that they create what we call hyperinflation. That is the inflation that can go into millions and billions of percents per year. One such example is what happened in Zimbabwe, but it has happened also before in Germany during the so-called Weimar Republic period. That was the period preceding the Second World War. It is happening right now in Venezuela, it has happened in Brazil in the past, and it will happen much, much more often in the future. But it's unlikely to occur with cryptocurrency. Again, this has to do with the fixed supply. Another difference between cryptocurrency and fiat currency is territorial validity. Fiat currency has territorial limits, whereas most cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, does not have a territorial limit. Example, the Canadian dollar is valid in Canada, and it's not valid in the US because over there they use the US dollar, which means that if a Canadian wants to purchase something from an American, or wants to import something from the US, it has to convert its Canadian dollar into US dollar in order to be able to facilitate that trade. Now, converting the Canadian dollar into the US dollar involves transaction cost, and this is not the case with something like Bitcoin. In the case of the Bitcoin, if the US exporter agrees to receive bitcoins from the Canadian importer, there is no more need to convert one currency into another because both of them have agreed to one currency, which is the Bitcoin or another cryptocurrency. This saves costs when doing international business. Another key difference between cryptocurrency and fiat currency is the role of financial intermediaries. Fiat currency transfer generally require banks. Okay, unless you pay cash, banks will be the trusted middleman that will facilitate the trade. What applies to all of them is they all subscribe to this policy, the KYC policy, which is Know Your Customer policy. It's almost impossible, to the best of my knowledge, to use the banking system and engage in an anonymous transaction because the banks adhere to the Know Your Customer policy, which means they want to know who the receiving and the sending party is. Anonymous is not an option unless you have some access to some really shady routes, which do exist, but for most people it's not an option. Bitcoin does not require banks as a middleman, which also means you can use it anonymously if that is what you wish. Now, at this point, you might think, beautiful, if I use the Bitcoin, I don't need to pay any transaction cost whatsoever. This is not completely true. Remember, the Bitcoin is based on the blockchain technology, and each block contains exactly the same information as all other blocks, namely who has bitcoins and how much bitcoins does this person have. It could be anonymous, you could be just user one, but user one is known to exist. When some kind of transaction is done in one block, all other blocks need to know about the transaction because all of them have to reduce the credit of one of the users and increase the credit of another user in order to have the complete picture still intact. This does require some kind of a fee to whoever is overseeing the blockchain, and this will be elaborated on in more detail in another lecture. So far, thanks a lot for your attention. Have a great day. Bye-bye. All right, everyone. So I'm going to talk about Bitcoin mining and the role of the Bitcoin miners in this lecture. Gold and Bitcoins have a lot in common. Both of them have a finite supply. Once you dig out gold, it doesn't grow back. It has a finite supply. The same applies to Bitcoins. It has a finite supply of 21 million. Also, like gold, the more you access, the harder it becomes to access the remaining reserves. That also holds for Bitcoins. The first Bitcoins could be accessed or mined relatively easy, but it became harder and harder, and it shall become harder and harder to mine or access the remaining Bitcoins. There are also differences. You see, mining gold requires this heavy machinery, just like you see here. Bulldozers and loaders and diggers. But Bitcoins doesn't require this kind of machinery. Rather, mining Bitcoins or accessing Bitcoins involves solving a series of increasingly more complex mathematical functions, for which you need computational power on computers. Now let us focus on the role of the Bitcoin miner. By the way, I really tried, but I couldn't resist showing you this since we talk about mining, one of my favorite games in the past. If you recognize this, that means one thing: you have some good taste for old school games. All right, let's continue. The first role of the Bitcoin miner is actually to mine and access or make new Bitcoins. We call this the reward of the Bitcoin miner. For that, you need some heavy duty computational power, okay? Normal CPUs won't really do the job, so what you need is a graphics card, a heavy-duty graphics card, preferably a whole series of them connected to each other to do the computational work to solve those increasingly more difficult mathematical problems and access the Bitcoins. Who is allowed to do that? Everyone is allowed to do that. There are no restrictions. As long as you have the computational power, you can do it. How many bitcoins are still available? Is it too late to start mining? No, there are still millions available, and it's definitely not too late to start mining. In fact, the last bitcoin, the 21 millionth units, is expected to be mined somewhere around 2100 something. We're not sure about that. There are some uncertainty factors at play, so there's still some time available if you feel the need to start mining. The second role of the miner is to secure and maintain the blockchain. Now, you already know the basics of the blockchain. The blockchain keeps a decentralized ledger of all the users, user 1, user 2, user 3, etc., and how much they have. Okay, so how much bitcoins they have at their disposal. The miners collectively maintain this blockchain. Their computers make sure that throughout this decentralized blockchain, all of the blocks have exactly the same information as to who has what. The third role of the miner is that this person facilitates trade and gets fees. Let me give you an example. Suppose that user 1 wants to do some kind of transaction with user 3. Okay, user 1 wants to give user 3 1 bitcoin. Now, user 1 does have a bitcoin at its disposal. In fact, it has 25 of them, so it can easily give one of them to user 3. So the Bitcoin miner that is overlooking one of these blocks, doesn't have to be block 1, could be any one of them, has to first check, does this user 1 have enough funds to give to this user? And it once checked, it's indeed the case that it has enough funds. So it comes to the conclusion that yes, indeed, it is possible to make this 25 and reduce it by 1, which will become 24, and take this 1 and increase it by 1, which will become 2. But that's not the end of the story. The blockchain is a decentralized thing. That means there are many blocks out there, and each block, block 1, block 2, block 3, has to have exactly the same information. So this information, this transaction or mutation from 25 to 24 and from 1 to 2 has to be communicated to all other blocks. This requires computational power, which is also offered by the miner in its third role, namely to facilitate trade. This is not done for free. The miner gets a fee for that service. Now, please note, this fee is voluntary. You don't have to give the fee, but if you don't offer a fee as a user, or the fee is not high enough, none of the owners of these blocks, which are all miners, will be tempted to use computational power to communicate the transaction to all other blocks, which means that if the fee that you are offering to a miner is not good enough, your transaction will not occur. So in that sense, yes, it is voluntary, this fee, but if you don't pay it or it's not high enough, your transaction does not occur, which means that it's not really voluntary. In other words, you're pretty much stuck with the fee. Now, a question remains. Once all the 21 million bitcoins have been dug up, what incentive do these miners still have to maintain this blockchain? Won't it all just crumble? This is something that I'm going to talk about in another video. So far, thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. Thanks. Hi there everyone. So we already talked about the following. We have 21 million bitcoins. The last one is going to be accessed sometime in the year 2100 something. And then the question arises, okay, once they have all been accessed, what incentive is there for the miners to still basically maintain this blockchain? Will it not just crumble? Now, a good place to start answering that question would be, for instance, a website like blockexplorer.com. If we scroll down just a little bit, we see the latest blocks that have been added to this blockchain. It is increasing over time, the size of the blockchain. And if we click on see all blocks, we see the blocks that have been recently added to the blockchain. And let's, for instance, go to this one, okay? Recently added to the blockchain. We see some interesting information here. For instance, this block was mined by Antminer. Now, who is Antminer? I have no clue. Could be some investment banking guy that does this in the evenings. Could be some Star Trek watching computer programmer that also does this in evenings. I have no idea. Doesn't even matter. But Antminer mined this block. And if you look closer, you see that there was a block reward of 12.5 BTC. 12.5 Bitcoins were awarded to this miner. So is that the end of the story? This person gets 12.5 Bitcoins and that's it? No, it's not the end of the story. Because as was already mentioned, every time a transaction occurs, all those people who basically oversee a block compete against each other to take that transaction and incorporate it in their block and then subsequently communicate that information to all other blocks out there. For instance, user 1 wants to give user 3 1 Bitcoin. Now, all of these different blocks will compete against each other to be the first to take this information and incorporate it in the complete blockchain. This requires computational power, and for that they will require a fee. So that is another way that each person overseeing a block makes his or her income. Now, for accessing a block, a miner is currently, at the time of recording, it's 2018, gets 12.5 Bitcoins. This halves periodically. Every few years, this amount of Bitcoins that is rewarded per blocks drops, and eventually it basically ends. However, you should take into consideration the following. Yes, the rewards will drop as time progresses. That is true. But also take into consideration that the adoption of Bitcoin as a way of paying will become more and more widespread, and so the fees that this person collects will most likely increase over time. Now you might say, that is horrible news. It's already very expensive to send a payment from user A to user B, because sometimes it requires tens of dollars in fees. Will that become even more expensive? That's not really what I refer to. Now, this is not so much that the fee per transaction becomes higher, but the volume of transactions become higher, and this accounts for basically this increase. The general expectation is that the fee per transaction will actually drop in the future. Now at this point, I can really imagine that you think to yourself, yeah, okay, I got it, I got the basic principle, but now tell me something operational, something practical. What is the transaction fee if I want to buy a bottle of Coke, which actually costs €1? How much am I going to pay in terms of fees? This is a very difficult question to answer. It's not that I don't want to or cannot, it's just that there are multiple complicating factors here. First of all, the transaction fees are not fixed. They change over time. Not so long ago, they were extremely high. They have dropped a little bit. And years back, when the Bitcoin was actually quite young, it was just a fraction of pennies. It was just a joke. Nobody worried about transaction fees, whereas they have risen to tens of dollars not too long ago. So they vary. For that reason, it's very difficult to tell you exactly what the transaction fee for a €1 Coke would be. But as of yet, unfortunately, it is quite high, okay? And so high that I think that the Coke is better bought with just a normal euro or dollar or Japanese yen or a dirham or whatever you have. At this point, it is unfortunately like that. However, in the future, this fee is expected to drop and most likely drop drastically. But there's also good news, and the good news is that if you make large transactions, those transactions, the fee that is attached to those transactions is actually quite reasonable, and on top of that, the speed of the transaction is also going to be much higher than would otherwise be if you would use the banking system, which sometimes takes 2, 3, 4 days to settle an international payment. Overall, the higher the fee you offer, the faster you are in line for your transaction to be validated. You can always engage in a transaction, but it will not get validated. The other person will not receive your money until someone who's overseeing a block accepts your fee and incorporates the amount in all the other blocks. As long as this doesn't happen, your transaction is just pending approval. And it could pend approval for a very long time. And by that time, trust me, this Coke will no longer be fit for consumption if the fee is too low. But you know what? Honestly, Coke is never fit for consumption. It's bad stuff. It's what my parents always told me, and I always listen to my parents. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you so much for your attention. Hope you find this useful. Have a great, fantastic day. Bye-bye. All right, everyone. So in the previous, I already explained you something about the basics of mining. Now some more background information. Mining Bitcoins is based on a proof of work, or if you are really cool, you say POW principle. And this basically entails the following. Miners, they solve increasingly complex mathematical puzzles. If you solve the puzzle, you found a solution, and you have proof of work, and that proof of work basically gives you the right to reap the rewards, which is an X number of Bitcoins. And this amount of rewards basically halves periodically. This was already explained in the previous lecture. Now, you cannot solve these mathematical puzzles just with a piece of paper and a pen and a calculator. What you need for that is basically computational power. And what you see, for instance, if you look at the Bitcoin at the time that it was not really mature, it was just on the market and the adoption rate was quite low. You saw that as a mining method, many people opted for just traditional CPUs. And CPU is just that chip in a standard laptop or a standard desktop. Many people just use the standard chip in their laptop or their desktop to do mining, and that worked just fine. It required a little bit of electricity, and it provided just a little bit of reward as well. As time progressed and these puzzles became more and more complex, people switched to the use of graphics cards. Okay, so these is nothing new for you if you're an online gamer. These are the cards that you use to get those crisp 3D graphics when you're playing, for instance, a video game. They could do the job faster and more efficient than a CPU, but as time progressed, a new entrant entered the market, and this was basically based on the ASIC principle. So we have these application-specific integrated circuits. Okay, these were specifically made for mining Bitcoins. So we have these Bitcoin USB miners designed specifically for mining Bitcoins. They are more efficient in terms of power consumption than a traditional graphics card and CPUs, and hence at a lower cost they give you a higher chance of actually finding Bitcoins during mining. And as Bitcoin is really maturing, what we see more and more is these so-called Bitcoin mining farms. They don't look exactly like this. How do they look like? They look more like this. So rows and rows of processors and also cooling devices, because it gets really hot there, and you typically find them, let's say, in cooler areas where the electricity cost is relatively low compared to the global average. And because of the huge scale of all of this, they can make a nice profit even at relatively low Bitcoin prices. Now, if we go back to this picture, these days a normal CPU, and even these, for instance, are not really efficient when it comes to mining Bitcoins. However, because Bitcoin is relatively far in terms of maturity, however, if you have these cryptocurrencies that are relatively young, so in terms of maturity younger, then still it might make sense to mine them at home just using standard non-fancy CPUs, just your standard laptop or your standard desktop. But for Bitcoin, it's not really cost effective to do that. So you have an alternative: either go for something else as a miner, another cryptocurrency, or for instance on a very, very large scale engage in farming, so what we saw here. But that's not the end of the story, because there are other alternatives. One alternative that you have is, for instance, pool mining. Now, what does pool mining exactly entail? It basically means that a number of parties, for instance, party A, party B, party C, several individuals or groups of individuals, they pool their resources and together they mine a Bitcoin or a number of Bitcoins. And then proportionally to the resources that they brought in the game, they are rewarded once a Bitcoin is mined. So you share your resources and you split the profits. Now on the internet you find several calculators that help you to get a rough estimate of whether it makes sense to actually enter into this pool mining with the equipment that you have. If you just, for instance, type in, for instance, crypto compare calculator in Google, then you will land on this website, which offers a calculator. Not the best calculator, not the only calculator, and not the one that I endorse, just a calculator. And it asks you for several pieces of information. I will focus on this top one later, but for instance, it asks you for your power consumption. You can just read that from the device that you're using. It asks you for your electricity cost. Well, this is something that differs from one person to another, from one company to another, from one country to another. You can just ask your energy supplier. And then the pool fee. Every pool has a fee, so a percentage that they ask for their contribution. And then on top we have hashing power. Now what is that? So it's asking for the hashing power, which you can, for instance, express in terahash, megahash, kilohash, etc. So what is it? Without going into too much detail unnecessarily, the hash basically gives us an indication of the speed of the device that you're using. If you're, for instance, using something like a Bitcoin mining USB, then basically the amount of hash is something that is just written on the device itself. So you can just easily look it up on the device itself and then input it there. So once you input some numbers here, and by the way, these numbers are just chose at random, they don't mean anything. But once you actually chose some numbers here, you provide input, it gives you a rough estimate of what you can actually expect to earn as a return. Another alternative that is at your disposal is cloud mining. Now in cloud mining, you actually outsource the mining to a professional mining company. Okay, so you engage in a plan and you provide them with funds, and then they will do the mining for you. Because these are professional companies, they will do it in a typically much more efficient way than you could ever do at home. Now, an example of a company that actually engages in this cloud mining, so they take your money and do the mining for you in a professional way, is Genesis Mining. This is not the only company that does that. This is not a company that I endorse or recommend. This is just a company, and it's a popular one, and it's a huge one. And if you, for instance, look at the pricing here, so if you just click on pricing and then subsequently scroll a little bit down, you first of all see the following. They offer various options, so not just Bitcoin but also other cryptocurrencies, so-called altcoins such as Ethereum, Monero, etc., etc. And then if we scroll down further, we see that for Bitcoin we have various plans. Okay, and these plans differ in terms of price, and they also differ in terms of the terahash that is at your disposal when they do the mining for you. And again, the terahash is an indication of the speed of the computations that they will employ in the mining. The higher the speed, the more power you have at your disposal, and obviously the likelihood of rewards will increase then. So I hope this background information serves you well, and good luck. All right, everyone. So What we're going to do right now is some breathing exercises. They will help you to focus on cryptocurrency. So I want you to breathe in and slowly breathe out, and just let all the negative energy out. I'm kidding, everyone. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to watch a couple of videos about so-called altcoins. These are alternatives to Bitcoin. Even though this is primarily a Bitcoin course, I thought it's a good idea to also have some basic attention to altcoins. So enjoy. All right, everyone. So as promised, also some attention to the alternatives to Bitcoin. And one of the most popular ones is actually this, Bitcoin Cash. Bitcoin Cash actually finds its genesis in 2017 when a fork basically split the protocol into two parts. Traditional Bitcoin with the ticker symbol BTC remained, but also something new came out of this fork, okay, which basically splits the protocol into two parts, namely Bitcoin Cash with this as its ticker symbol. And a ticker symbol is something that allows you to quickly look up, for instance, exchange rates. If you want to know, for instance, the exchange rate between Bitcoin Cash and Euro, you look at this. All right, something like that. Now at this point you might ask yourself, okay, so what is the point of this fork? Why would someone split Bitcoin into two parts, Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash? It has everything to do with the size of the blocks. Okay, the size of the blocks in the blockchain that actually belongs to Bitcoin Cash are simply much larger. Now you might think, so what? Who cares? Well, the consumer cares. The person who uses Bitcoin cares. Remember, every time a transaction occurs, for instance, from user 1 to user 3, where, for instance, user 1 gives 1 unit to user 3, okay, 1 Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash to user 3, this information has to be updated on all blocks. A limited block size means that it takes longer to handle transactions, which means that people want to engage in a transaction have to wait longer to have their transaction validated. This is something that was already explained to you. Now, the size of a Bitcoin Cash block in a blockchain is larger than one in Bitcoin. As such, Bitcoin Cash blocks can handle much more transactions per second than traditional Bitcoin blocks. And this translates into smaller transaction fees. I have to say though that still, if we compare Bitcoin Cash in terms of transactions per second that it can handle, if we compare this, for instance, to something like Visa can handle much more than that. So even though Bitcoin Cash has alleviated the problem to some extent, it still has a long way to go. So basically, summing everything up, the Bitcoin shortcomings are, among other things, that the size of the blocks is quite limited, which causes long transaction time and which leads to relatively high transaction fees. So at this point you might think, well, okay, Bitcoin Cash thus has a bunch of advantages and no disadvantages relative to traditional Bitcoin. That's not completely true, because bigger block sizes disadvantage small miners in favor of big corporate miners. You see, when you have huge blocks, that means that a small-time miner that uses maybe just a handful of graphics card to basically do mining cannot really compete with those big miners that really have the computational power to deal with these larger block sizes. The effect of that could be that over time the Bitcoin Cash market gets dominated by huge corporate parties, which runs against, I guess, a little bit the spirit of cryptocurrencies. But then again, this is a matter of taste, and I leave judgment to you. Hey, welcome everyone. We're going to talk about Ethereum. Ethereum is more than just electronic cash. If you look at something like Bitcoin, it's primarily meant for using it for payments. Okay, now Ethereum is a little bit more than that, or not a little bit, actually a lot more. It's a platform which has Ether as its platform currency, and it facilitates smart contracts. Okay, I'm going to explain what smart contracts are in a bit, but I can tell you that this is highly promising. This stuff can change the way we do business, both in the private and the public sector. Now, before we move on, Ethereum has gone through something that we call actually a fork. Now, that actually means that the Ethereum was split into two parts. We have the traditional Ethereum, and we have Ethereum Classic. We're going to focus mostly on Ethereum. Now, the ticker symbol that belongs to Ethereum is this one, and the ticker symbol that belongs to Ethereum Classic is this one. Why do you need the ticker symbol? Well, if you want to know, for instance, the exchange rate between Ethereum and, for instance, the US dollar, you can just type this in Google and quickly you get the information. There are tons of free websites that offer this kind of information, so these ticker symbols are very handy for that, quickly checking what one kind of cryptocurrency is doing in terms of value. Now, as I promised you, I'm going to explain to you what smart contracts actually are and why they're so interesting. So let's have a look now. A smart contract is actually nothing more than a programmable IFTTT. Now, what does this part mean? It simply means if this, then that. Okay, so it's basically a set of instructions that you can program, and it basically says if a condition holds, then something else will occur. If this person, for instance, meets requirement X and Y and Z and has also more than $200 in his account and is a female or is living in San Francisco, then this person has the right for service A, B, or C. Okay, that's also an if this, then that principle. Now let's have a look at an example. I'm going to start with an example in the public sector, and then I'm going to move to the private sector. So in the public sector, in a country, we have citizens, right? Like these, okay? We have citizens like this. And in pretty much all countries, a big part of the public expenditure is on healthcare. And so people spend a lot of money on healthcare. And we have an army of bureaucrats that actually keep track of those expenses and make sure that there's no messing around, so that people don't claim that, for instance, they spent money on healthcare when in fact they went to the coffee shop and bought a frappuccino, whatever, weird kind of coffee and consumed it with their friends. Hey, by the way, this is supposed to be a hospital, just for your information. I hope it's clear. Now, so the money that is spent on healthcare in most countries is already a lot, okay? But so is the money that is spent on those bureaucrats that keep track of the money that is being spent. Now, here comes the interesting thing, because, you know, with smart contracts, you can have the same situation as before, but the smart contract, for instance, might stipulate that every person receives a budget. Okay, so in this blockchain, every person receives a budget, and this budget is pre-programmed. So with this IFTT principle, it is programmed that it can only be used for healthcare services and may not be used for anything else. So this is indicated in this smart contract. So what are the implications here? So this little thing basically eliminates the raison d'être. That's right, people. I know French, so don't mess around with me. It eliminates the raison d'être, or the reason of existence, of this army of bureaucrats, because there's no longer any need for people to check, because it has already been pre-programmed that the money can only be used for healthcare. Saves a lot of money. But you know what, at the same time, I get kind of scared because, this has the potential to eliminate tons of job opportunities, and we have armies of bureaucrats. We're already losing a lot of job opportunities due to the fact that in the coming years, a lot of cars will become self-driving and a lot of trucks will become self-driving. So I wonder what is going to happen here, and maybe our best solution for the long term is to have this universal basic income. But you know what? We'll see. Now let's continue to another example, this one from the private sector. Right now we have a lot of business, for instance, a new competitor of Starbucks or whatever, that needs startup capital to expand or commence operations. And you have a lot of these financial intermediaries. A Kickstarter is just one of them that actually help connect potential investors like you and me with the businesses, okay? And they also oversee the game and make sure that everything is fair. For instance, suppose that this business says I need €3 in total, and then I will start the business, and then I will share my profits with you when the time is there. Now, the financial intermediary makes sure that the funds that come from the investors are only passed to the business if at least the first condition holds. So only if the full €3 has been gathered will this money pass on to the business, and not before that. And of course, for that service, for overseeing that, they get some kind of a fee. If instead of the €3 only €2 was gathered, then the money is returned by the financial intermediary, the trusted third party, back to the investors. Now the thing is, with smart contracts you can completely eliminate the need for this trusted third party, because you can program basically in the blockchain with a smart contract a condition that only if the full €3 is gathered can it be passed on to the business, and otherwise it is given back to the investors immediately. Yeah? So again, it saves a lot of money, and it eliminates basically an unnecessary middleman. Fortune 500 companies are all on top of this. This is going to be really the future of doing business. The implications are really, really interesting. One more thing that you can do with this Ethereum platform is you can create new digital assets, tokens. Basically, you can make your new cryptocurrency. You can make new cryptocurrency if you know how to deal with the platform. And when you make a new cryptocurrency, we call this an ICO, initial coin offering. They were really mushrooming just not so long ago, and some governments have even regulated the trade in those because it was becoming quite dangerous and risky for investors. It is promising. You can make a lot of money. You can also lose a lot of money because it's still not very regulated in all parts of the world. And you might actually step into a new cryptocurrency that has very, very little promise, and you can lose some serious money. So if you do make the choice to enter into an ICO, please really do your homework in that regard. There's tons of these, and there are going to be much more, so be careful. That's it for this session. Thanks a lot for your attention, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks. Hi there everyone. So I'm going to talk about cryptocurrency wallets. Of course, I'm going to focus on the Bitcoin. It's quite an extensive topic, and hence I cut it into multiple parts. Let's start with the definition. What is a cryptocurrency wallet? Well, a cryptocurrency wallet allows you to, with your public key, which is also referred to as a public address, and your private key, communicate or interact with any kind of blockchain in order to basically engage in transactions using a cryptocurrency. And of course, in this set of lectures, we mostly focus on the Bitcoin. There are dozens of wallets out there. Some of them accept only one kind of cryptocurrency, some of them multiple types. At the very outset, I want you to have a very clear picture of what a wallet actually is. And it's actually quite similar to email, which is something that we are all familiar with. Now, any person can use email. And with that, we can communicate with pretty much everyone else in the world, but it does require two keys. The first is the email address. Okay, in this case, it's naive-looking-guy@something-something.com. This email address is public. It's okay if other people know the email address. In fact, they should know the email address if you wish them to communicate with you. However, there is a second type of key that is also needed in order to communicate with the world, and that is the password. And in this case, this guy, very naive looking guy, has as a password, "I trust everyone forever." Okay? Now, this second key, this one should be absolutely private, and this is not something for the world to know. This is something for you to know. So we have two keys. We have the public key and we have the private key. The same principle holds for these wallets, because they too have two sets of keys. One is a public key or public address, and one is a private key. And you need both of them to engage in any kind of transaction with someone else using Bitcoin or whatever other cryptocurrency. So this is the basic principle behind a cryptocurrency wallet. We're going to continue with more details after that. Hi there. Now, there are various cryptocurrency wallets out there. We can basically distinguish the following types: desktop wallets, mobile wallets, web wallets, hardware wallets, and finally, last but not least, paper wallets. In the following, I'm going to discuss them one by one. Let's start with desktop wallets. When you use a desktop wallet, software is actually downloaded on your desktop or your laptop, which also means that if you want to engage in transactions, you need access to your desktop or your laptop. So if you do most of your transactions at home where your desktop and your laptops are, no problem. But if you want to do this stuff on the go and you don't always carry your laptop with you, then this can become a little bit of a burden. In terms of security, generally desktop wallets are considered relatively secure, but as always you have various risks, the risk of viruses, trojans, a meltdown, etc. Look, these risks can be big or small depending on you. If you use outdated antivirus, if you do not protect your computer very well, if it's an old computer, not very reliable, and at any moment it can basically break down, and you do not make backups, you run obviously a bigger risk than if you take precautions. Next, we have mobile wallets. Now, they're very comparable to desktop wallets, but you know what, surprise, surprise, instead of downloading it on your desktop or laptop, you download the wallet on your mobile phone. And for transactions, you need access to your mobile device. The security issues are, in my opinion, a little bit higher than with desktop. Why? Because, you know, the same kind of security issues that a desktop has also more or less apply to a mobile. Plus, there's an extra security issue, and that is losing the mobile device, which, you know, it happens from time to time. How often have you not heard someone losing the mobile device? But, you know, losing a desktop device, that happens, you know, not so often. It will be kind of weird. So we have basically an extra kind of risk, and hence I would say it's a little bit higher in terms of risk than a desktop wallet. Again, there are ways to protect yourself. Losing your mobile phone does not per se mean that you lose all your bitcoins. There are ways to protect yourself by taking precautions and minimizing the risks. You know, and here too, I want to point out that the risks are greater or smaller, also depending on you and how you behave and how you protect yourself. If you use a mobile phone and it's not protected by a PIN number, you use passwords that are weak, you use only a single layer of protection, for instance, just a PIN number instead of a two-factor protection, such as a PIN number and some kind of a fingerprint recognition or face recognition or something like that, an extra layer of security. That all impacts how secure your wallet is. So to a large extent, you control the risk. This applies basically to all of these different wallets. Next we have these web wallets, so basically cloud-based wallets. Your wallet is basically part of the World Wide Web, which means that the mobility is going to be quite high, access is going to be quite easy. Security, it varies. It really depends on who is exactly offering this kind of wallet and what they are doing to protect your wallet in the cloud, and what you are doing to protect access to your wallet in the cloud. In that sense, I guess it's similar to mobile and desktop wallets. Then we have what, in my opinion and the opinion of many others, is probably one of the most safe ways to hold a wallet, a cryptocurrency wallet, and that is a hardware wallet. What is a hardware wallet? In the case of a hardware wallet, data is cold stored, so it is not stored on the internet but offline in something like this, which kind of looks like a USB stick, but it has a higher functionality. Since it is offline, it is cold stored, it means that it's not really vulnerable to attacks via the internet, and most of the attacks occur via the internet. In general, the security of these is good. If you have a really good hardware wallet, it even means that if something should happen and you should lose this hardware and you have taken precautions, it means that still your funds could be safe if you have taken the necessary precautions. Finally, we have the paper wallet, in which the keys are actually printed on a piece of paper. That's why it's called a paper wallet. And here the security could be great or horrible depending on you. Because it is stored outside the internet, it means that you're not likely to be attacked by someone via the internet, which closes one of the favorite routes for people who want to do any kind of mischief. But still, if you're careless, the stuff gets lost, the stuff gets stolen, because also offline stuff can get stolen, you might run into problems. So it is secure or not secure, again, based on you. That is actually the main theme here. That means that I cannot recommend just one method as the best, because there's an extra layer of complexity here, and that layer is you and how you behave and how you protect yourself and how many risks you are exposed to. All in all, I hope you got a good understanding of the different types of wallets that exist. We're going to continue with this in the next part. At this point, you know the basic principle behind the cryptocurrency wallet, and I've discussed the various types of wallets that exist. Now comes the difficult part, choosing a wallet. Now, I myself do not endorse any kind of wallet. I do not advertise anything. That is not my role as a teacher. It's just not right to do that. As such, I leave the choice to you, but I want you to consider several factors when choosing a wallet. First thing, a user experience. Some of these wallets with a lot of functionality, they are also difficult to use, especially for a beginner. Others with less functionality are easy to use and easy to master by beginners. And the easiest way to find out user experience these days, just Google it. Just type in the name of the wallet you're considering it, Google it, and then look at reviews and see what other people are saying about the use and the ease of use of it. Second thing to consider is security. You don't like to walk around with a wallet that has a huge hole in it. Well, if it is, for instance, a web-based wallet, you also don't like to have holes, digital holes in the system. So make sure that if it is used, for instance, a website or something like that, that it's a secure website. These www dot whatever is preceded by either this or this. These with the S are the secure version, so make sure that that website is secure. And also check whether they offer 2FA security, which is basically a two-factor security. So we have one-factor security, which is, for instance, just a password, and two-factor security actually adds an extra layer of security. It could be diverse. For instance, it could be a password plus some kind of a fingerprint authentication or face recognition or whatever, or an extra text message that is sent to your mobile on top of the password that you send to verify whether it's really you who is logging in. This is called basically a 2FA, a two-factor security model. And if the wallet is offering that, that means more security for you. Check whether the wallet is open source or not. Many people think open source is bad, but in my opinion, and it's my opinion, open source can actually have advantages over the rest, because open source means that at any time, many people are constantly checking the code to see whether there are any kind of vulnerabilities there. Whereas if it's not open source, you kind of have to trust the people or the person who's working for the company that is offering the wallet to make sure that this person or these people have everything under control and are on top of these vulnerabilities. Again, I'm just explaining to you the possible benefits of open source. The choice is yours. One more factor to consider is this: the wallet's KYC policy. This is actually know your customer policy, and this is very well known in the financial sector. So banks, for instance, they want to know who is sending and who is receiving the money. They want to know the name of this person, the identity of this person. Some of the wallets, they go quite far in applying this know your customer policy. So they want to know a lot about you. Others, they don't go that far and they don't want to know a lot about you. The less they want to know about you, the more your privacy is guarded. So check the KYC policy of this wallet before you make a choice, assuming you like your privacy. One more thing to consider is, which cryptocurrency does this wallet actually support? Not every wallet supports every cryptocurrency. So make sure that you also do your homework and make sure that the wallet supports whatever cryptocurrency you want to engage in. Some wallets actually support multiple cryptocurrencies. Then a friendly tip, and that is diversify. So there are many people out there who keep their cryptocurrencies in multiple wallets. Okay, they diversify their assets and spread them over multiple wallets to basically minimize the risk. So for instance, a large part of their holdings might be stored cold, which is what you see here, for instance, in these hardware wallets, which is rather secure, again, depending on how you use it. And they would keep, for instance, a smaller part of their holdings hot in, for instance, a mobile wallet or so, which is a little bit more vulnerable than hardware wallets, I would say. So diversification is something that I see all the time and maybe something for you to consider as well. So then it becomes time to actually choose the kind of wallet. If you want to go, for instance, for a desktop wallet or a web-based wallet, etc., there are tons of websites just on the internet. Just type it in Google and you will land on websites such as, for instance, this bitcoin.com, but I don't endorse this website. I don't recommend this website. This is just a website, which if you just browse through it, you see that they, for instance, offer multiple suppliers of wallets, multiple suppliers of wallets. And then with the knowledge that you have about the factors that you should consider, it's up to you to make a correct choice that fits to your specific needs. All right, that's it, everyone. Have a great day. Thanks. Bye-bye. Hi there, everyone. So how do you keep track of the value of various cryptocurrencies? There are literally hundreds of different cryptocurrencies out there. How do you keep track of their value? I'm going to show you in this video. A great source for this information that I myself like to use is CoinMarketCap. Referral.com. Let's have a look at this site. On the top left, we see the amount of cryptocurrencies listed. As you can see, there are hundreds of these different forms of cryptocurrency. The total market cap or market capitalization is basically the amount of coins multiplied by their current market value. And then we see something else interesting, BTC dominance. That metric tells us what part of the total market in terms of market capitalization the Bitcoin takes. And in this case, it's almost 50% of the market. So while we have these hundreds of different cryptocurrencies out there, it seems that as of yet, the most important one is still the Bitcoin. Let's explore the site a little bit further. As we scroll down, what we see is some popular cryptocurrencies, well, on top the Bitcoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash, etc., etc. We see the market cap or market capitalization again, which you already know what it is, the price per unit, and then we also see the change in the last 24 hours. If you would like to have more information, well, it's possible. We just click on, for instance, the price. And now something interesting happens. We see here on the left side a number of sources, and then we see various prices. Yes, you see it correctly. On different markets or different exchanges, the price per unit is a little bit different. And yes, there are possibilities to engage in arbitrage, although I have to say the possibilities are quite limited. And arbitrage is basically taking advantage of these price differentials to make a profit. But again, the opportunities are smaller than appears if you just look at these data here. You can also see which markets, which exchanges basically dominate. If you look at the volume or percentage of the trades that they actually account for. Now let's go back and click on the graph here, for instance, the graph of Bitcoin, and inspect it a little bit more closely. You click on it, and it shows us basically the price development of the Bitcoin from 2012 up until now. If you wish to inspect a specific part of this graph a little bit closer, you can do so by just clicking and dragging these handles over here. For instance, I might be interested in having a look at the bubble that occurred around 2013-2014. So I click and drag this part to highlight 2013-2014. And then, as you can see, the graph is drawn again. It highlights the little bubble that occurred in 2013 and 2014. Which, by the way, interestingly enough, was followed by a much bigger bubble a few years after that. So now you basically know where to track the value of these various cryptocurrencies that exist out there. I hope you find this useful. Thank you for your attention. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Take care. Hi there, everyone. So obviously at some point you want to trade your Bitcoin for something else, and that something else is either another cryptocurrency or fiat currency such as dollars, yen, pounds, etc. What possibilities do you have? Well, the most popular possibility is just to use a traditional online exchange. I'm going to talk about them in more detail soon, but first I want you to have a look at the possible features that they might have. By the way, this is a non-exhaustive list. This means that there will be some online exchanges that have certain features that are not named here, but these are the popular ones. I would say the two basic features of an online exchange is that they allow you to trade Bitcoins and often altcoins. These are alternatives to Bitcoins, such as Bitcoin Cash and Ethereum. They allow you to trade that for fiat currency, which is dollars, euros, pounds, etc., etc. Some of them also offer the possibility of an integrated debit card. That means that, a debit card, you have a banking account, and on the banking account is some money deposited, and then you can use the debit card with your PIN number to pay in shops for your drinks, for your watch, for your clothing, etc., etc. Now, a debit card that is linked to these crypto online exchanges will do the following. Most often will do exactly the same thing as a normal debit card, but instead of it being supported by normal currency or fiat currency deposits, it is supported by a cryptocurrency deposit. So that is a nice feature to have. Do note the following though. Yes, the debit card is possible, but not everywhere. In some countries it is possible, in some countries it is not possible. And then there's an extra layer of complexity, which is the KYC policy, which was the Know Your Customer policy, that some of these exchanges enforce rigorously and others maybe less rigorously. The more rigorously they push this KYC policy, the harder it is to actually engage in any kind of anonymous transaction. PayPal integration is also a nice feature to have. Some of these online exchanges have PayPal features, which means you can link your PayPal account to the online exchange and use the benefits thereof. And then another thing to look out for is, does this exchange offer into cryptocurrency trading? What I mean with that is the following. Can I take my Bitcoins and, for instance, convert them into a very, very exotic cryptocurrency out there? Remember, there are dozens of cryptocurrencies out there, some of which you have never heard of, and it's always a cool feature to have the possibility to convert your Bitcoin into these more exotic or less exotic cryptocurrency alternatives. At this point, you might be asking yourself, okay, which online exchange should I use? Well, it's really my policy to not endorse anything and to not give any recommendations about one specific product. That is not my role as a teacher. The only thing I can do is, for instance, what I just did, namely to point out some features that you can look out for and point you to, for instance, websites such as this. This is not the best website. It's not a website that I recommend or endorse. This is just a website that compares. This is bestbitcoinexchange.io. It's just a website that compares the various online exchanges. As you can see, for instance, here it lists what you can pay with, the available coins. So this is if you're interested in cryptocurrency trading, and it also gives some reviews. Okay, and again, I don't know this website very well. This is just a website, but you can, for instance, look at this and compare what is out there, Coinbase, Luno24option.com, etc., etc. You can just make a choice based on the criteria that are important for you. Another possibility that is available now for a few years in a few places, because it's still quite limited in terms of geography, is this Bitcoin ATM idea, or BTM. So ATM stands for Automated Teller Machine. These are these machines that you can insert your credit card or your debit card, and then out comes money after you type in your PIN code. The same principle actually is applied to the Bitcoin here. You can withdraw Bitcoin, you can buy Bitcoin, and in some of them you can also sell. Withdrawing Bitcoins often involves the use of these, so these QR codes that give a specific description of what you are entitled for. Depending on the specific machine that you're using, you might get away with very little identification, or the KYC policy might be enforced quite rigorously, which means that more identification is needed. This depends per region, this depends per machine. Now, last but not least, one other way to actually engage in a transaction, so trade Bitcoins for fiat currency, is just directly. So find someone, family member, friend, colleague, whatever, someone you trust, and just deposit the Bitcoins on in their wallet, and then pocket the cash, the fiat currency that they pay you. Make sure it's someone you trust, because if it's not the case, then the money that leaves your cryptocurrency wallet, your Bitcoin wallet, that's a one-way trip. It's not coming back unless the other party agrees with it. So make sure that you trust the other party. There are also some other ways to engage in such a bilateral transaction and run a less risk. But honestly, I do not recommend them. In my opinion, I'm familiar with them, but I do not recommend them because, in my opinion, from what I have seen and heard, the risks and the hassle does not weigh against the small benefits of circumventing the official online exchanges that I just discussed. All right, everyone. So in this lecture, I'm going to talk about cryptocurrencies, how their price is determined, and the importance of recognizing bubbles in their prices. So let's start with the following. How is price determined? Not just Bitcoins, but pretty much everything. This is some basic economics and some basic rules apply here. For instance, increased demand at a given supply increases the price. Suppose that one Bitcoin, or it doesn't even have to be a Bitcoin, it could be a cake or a computer or a car or whatever. Suppose that it has right now a price of, for instance, €100 per unit. And there's currently one person interested in having it. What happens when the demand increases? Well, more people bid against each other to have access to this one, which means that this price will go up. It also means that the converse holds true. So when increased demand at a given supply increases price, it also means that decreased demand at a given supply decreases price. Another basic economics law is this: increased supply at a given demand decreases price. If this right now has a value of €100 and there's only one person who wants to have it, the demand consists of just one person, and the supply is increased, the price of whatever good or service we're talking about will drop. Of course, this requires the ceteris paribus clause, which means all other factors are kept constant. We ignore all other factors here that are not explicitly discussed. Now, so far, this was just basics, and I'm sure for most of you it's nothing new. But we're going to make it a little bit more complex. We're going to make a distinction here between demand that is consumptive, and that occurs when you buy something to consume it. For instance, you buy a house, you want to live in it. Or you buy gold and you want to make a gold watch or a gold ring. Or you buy metals because you own a factory that creates cars. Okay, this is consumptive demand. We also have a more sinister kind of demand, which is speculative demand. Speculative demand occurs when you buy something not to consume it, but rather to flip it. And flipping is when you buy something now, don't consume it, and you just want to sell it later for a higher price. For instance, you buy metals, not because you own a factory that creates cars, but you buy the metal because you want to keep it for a while, not use it, and sell it later for a profit. Or you buy gold, not because you want to make a gold watch or a gold ring, you just want to keep it for a while and sell it later. Or you buy a house, not because you want to live in it, because you want to use it as an investment and sell it later for a profit. That's flipping. Now, at this point, you might ask yourself, why is this relevant for me? I want to know more about cryptocurrency. But trust me, this helps you to determine whether you are dealing with a bubble or not. And knowing whether you're dealing with a bubble or not is highly relevant for making an investment decision in any kind of cryptocurrency. It doesn't matter if it's Bitcoin, Bitcoin Cash, or whatever. I'm going to start here with a scenario. And this scenario actually unfolds in country X, and it unfolds in its housing market. Okay, so here in this graph, we have the time factor, okay? And we show here on the y-axis two factors. First, in blue, the average price of an average house in country X. And in yellow, we show the consumption of houses in country X. Consumption is basically every person that moves into a house and lives in it. That's one extra consumption. Now, suppose that for a long period of time, the consumption of houses in country X has been quite stable. Country X is a poor country, but suddenly something happens at this point. They discover that they have huge amounts of gold and silver and precious metals in this country, and this attracts a lot of foreign companies to this country. And also a lot of expats will move into that country to help those people exploit those mineral reserves. Because there's a sudden increase of population in that country, the consumption, shown here by yellow, will also increase, which is what you see here of houses, and then it stabilizes again. If you would look at the prices of houses, okay, we should see something like this. Here is also quite stable. Here it will also spike and then continue like this. Why would it spike here? Well, because there is more consumptive demand, so the consumptive demand increase occurs and it dominates, and hence the prices increase. This price increase is sustainable. It's gonna stay there for the long term. Why? Because it is supported by consumptive demand increase, which is actually what happened here. More people want to have housing to live in it, which pushes the price up. And as long as those extra people are going to be there, the price is going to have a very meaningful reason to stay up. Now let's look at another scenario. Suppose that the consumption of houses in this country is stable throughout time. The gold and the silver and those mineral wealths never are discovered. So this country is still a poor country, and the prices are just as stable as the consumptive demand. But something happens at this point. For some reason, a part of the population believes that it's a great investment to invest in houses and to flip them later. Let's say 5% of the population believes that. The fact that 5% of people now start borrowing money and invest in new places, not to live in it, but to flip it later, will cause the prices to increase. This was one of the laws that we talked about. At a given supply, an increase in demand will cause prices to increase. Now, this price increase, which in a way is a self-fulfilling prophecy, will attract other people, let's say an additional 10, 20, 30% of the people, to do exactly the same. We get exactly the same price increase, but this time it is much larger. Why? Because we're not talking about 5% of the population, but now a much bigger portion of the population. At one point, even large institutional investors such as banks and insurance companies and pension funds will also start jumping in this market, and they will buy with huge amounts of money also houses to make use of this beautiful investment opportunity. This will go on and on and on until you reach a certain point. Maybe this point, or it could be something else. At this point, some of the investors realize that it has gone on long enough and they start pulling out. They cash in their profit and they offer all of their houses for sale. A sudden increase in supply will cause prices to drop suddenly, okay? And this sudden drop of prices will scare others because they're now afraid, what is going to happen to my investment? Especially because many of them used borrowed money to actually enter in this market. So you have to imagine that you bought here and you wake up and you're eating breakfast, okay? With your wife maybe, and you have a small kid, and the kid is crying, and the wife is also crying because she's afraid, the kid is also afraid, and you borrowed money to actually invest at this point. And now already your investment is worth less than what you bought it for. Now, if you're not going to get scared, your wife will make you get scared, and you're going to also sell whatever you have. What this will cause is that the prices will drop even further, some kind of a mass effect, until more or less the old trend is reached, which is what will happen here. Now, this part we refer to as a bubble being formed. This part is the peak of the bubble. At this point, it bursts. And this part shows the actual bursting of the bubble. Whatever it was, could be a Bitcoin, a house, metals, some kind of a food item, it loses price rapidly. Now, bubbles form and burst all the time in different markets. They can form in real estate, housing, they can form in metals, they can form in food, they can form in stocks, whatever. Here we see another example. This is the so-called dot-com bubble. This affected the stocks of internet-related companies, and it started forming in the late 90s and burst in the early zeros. As you can see, it has this characteristic shape. So here the bubble was actually being formed. This was the peak. At this point, it burst and takes down with it a whole bunch of dollar or market capitalization, as we call it in the industry. I hope at this point it became clear to you why am I explaining this. Once you know that you're dealing with a bubble, you should also expect that any bubble will burst. The only question is when. So you should be ready to accept the possibility of this bubble bursting, and it will burst very fast. In a matter of 2-3 days, it could lose 30, 40, 50% of its value. So how do you know whether you're dealing with a bubble or not? Look, in this case and this case, in both cases we had a price increase, but in this case, remember, it was sustainable, so it was not a bubble. And in this case, it was not sustainable, okay? It was not sustainable, unsustainable, because it was mostly based on speculative demand rather than consumptive demand. So how do you recognize whether a price increase is there to stay or whether it's just a matter of time before it bursts and corrects down? How do you recognize whether you're dealing with a bubble or not? You have to find out whether this increase in price is accompanied by an increase in consumptive demand. Because if it is supported by an increase in consumptive demand, then there's not so much to worry about. Now, how do you find out whether a cryptocurrency is subject to a bubble or not? Let's have a look. I just went to Yahoo Finance, which is a great source of free information. And I just looked up, I just typed in BTC, which is the ticker symbol for Bitcoin. And as you can see right now, one Bitcoin is worth right now $6,953 per Bitcoin. How do I know whether there's some kind of a bubble in this market or not? Well, let's look at the chart. And we go for here, the max period of time. And you know what? Let's go full screen in order to see things just a little bit better. Let's go to max, the maximum amount of time. Well, as you can see here, for a long time, the Bitcoin prices have been relatively stable. Then there's at this point, somewhere in 2017, there's a huge climb. You see that? In 2017, suddenly there's a huge climb that we can observe. Now, you have to ask yourself, is this huge climb accompanied by an equally huge climb in consumption of Bitcoins? Is this accompanied by an equally large jump of people who use Bitcoins in practice, who use Bitcoins to buy cars and food and I don't know, computers and travel and whatever? If the answer is yes, according to you, then most likely you're not dealing with a bubble. But if the answer is no, you are dealing most likely with a bubble. And I'm going to tell you the answer is no, and you are dealing with a bubble. And as you can see, the bubble has actually already kind of burst, and it seems that it hasn't stabilized just yet. So there is still room for it to go down further. Now, at this point, you might say, okay, end of the story. I wanted to invest in Bitcoins, but I won't now that I heard this. No, that's not the full end of the story, because there's something I want to show you. If we go here to this part, there's something interesting that I want to focus on. So I'm going to focus between 2013 and 2015 and make it larger so it's clearly more visible. So I'm going to go here to date range, and change it from 2013 to 2015 and apply. As you can see, something also happens around 2013, an equally large jump, okay, from roughly $130 in a very short period. The Bitcoin price went to roughly $1,200. Okay, so that too was in effect a bubble, and also that bubble burst subsequently, and you see that the prices stabilized more or less where the old trend was. The interesting thing is that after this, a much bigger bubble formed in this market, and those people who at this point thought we have lost everything, if they would have stuck, if they would have remained in the market, which offered roughly $200 per Bitcoin, in just a matter of a few years, they would be able to have almost 20,000 for that same Bitcoin. What I'm trying to say is the fact that there's a bubble does not mean that it's the end of the story. There might be another bubble coming on, which is much bigger. Is this worth the risk? I am not going to judge it for you. This is completely up to you. I don't give any kind of investment advice. I just try to enlighten you and show you the market as it is. And you know what? By the way, there is also an increase visible in consumptive demand of the Bitcoin. I have this habit that every Thursday in my house, it's a shawarma night. So I order shawarma. And in Holland, we use this site thuisbezorgd.nl. And to my surprise, I also saw that since recently, you can pay for your shawarma or your kebab or whatever, pizza or whatever you want to order. You can use the Bitcoin to pay for that. So it is really also increasing in terms of consumptive demand. That actually occurs. But in my opinion, the dominating force here is speculative. Okay? So I hope you learned something here. Thank you so much for your attention and have a great day.